Welcome back to Ascend Legal 101. I'm Ramona, and this is the place where we're having hard conversations to help you develop strategies to navigate these changing times by inspiring and empowering you to achieve your personal and professional goals. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like button, share with your friends, and subscribe to see future videos. Today we're speaking to retired Brigadier-General and PhD Gregory Matte. Greg is an accomplished Canadian Armed Forces pilot and established leader with extensive academic, professional, and applied experience in leadership, management, and training within government as well as the private sector. Today, Greg and I are going to discuss apprenticeship programs in Canada, so please join me in welcoming Greg Matte. Thank you for joining me today. Today we're joined by retired Brigadier-General Gregory Matte, who is also a PhD. So are we calling you Dr. Matte now?
I ask people just to call me Greg.
Perfect.
Only my mother calls me Gregory.
Okay. Greg and I were talking before we started, and normally I like to memorize the CVs or the background or bio of my guests. And with Greg, his accomplishments are so great that there's no way in heck this noggin is going to memorize all of that. And I have his sort of spread across my desk here. And I mean, there are pages and pages of his past volunteer activities, publications, awards, affiliations that we're just not going to get into today. But today is kind of our lucky day, because we've got a superstar with us, and we're going to focus our conversation on apprenticeships. And I think what we'll start with is just giving a bit of background. So I'm going to kind of go through your CV a little bit, just hit the high points backwards. And then if you can enlighten me on anything that I'm missing or that's important to you, because you have such a great deal of experience. I think we could probably spend quite a lot of time just going through that. So,
well, that's fine, but let me just start by saying thank you for asking me to do this little podcast. I really appreciate it. Flattery gets you everywhere, but I think if my mother heard what you said, she'd probably stand to correct everything you said about being a superstar and everything else. She'd probably see someone that was unable to hold a job for longer than a couple of years at a time, and so had lots of experience in many areas. So with that.
Well, thank you for that, because I know a lot of people who are, who kind of beat themselves up about being sort of multi-passionate or, always looking for the next challenge.
Sure.
And perhaps that's a conversation we can have later on as well. So you joined the military for the second time in June of 1981. And why was that the second time?
Well, the story goes something like this. When I was a teenager, I got involved with the scouting movement, and I just loved it. I adored everything about the outdoors, working with teams, learning new skills, earning badges on my sash and everything else. And over the period of 4 years I was with Scouts, my Scout leaders kind of pushed me towards working towards the Chief Scout Award, which is one step down from the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And so being who I was at the time, I said, yeah, okay, I'll give it a shot, and ended up getting it and was awarded the Chief Scout Award by the Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia in this big ceremony at Acadia University way back in probably 1979. And so being in grade 11, I'm kind of thinking like, okay, what's after high school? And I was of the mind at the time that I wanted to become a forest ranger. I wanted to work for Parks Canada. I wanted to be involved with nature, everything that's involved with, our climate, our forests, our land, our water. And to do so, I required to move from Nova Scotia to New Brunswick to study at the University of New Brunswick, because that was the only university that offered a program that would meet the needs that I required to get into Parks Canada. And so it was one of those dinner conversations with my mom and dad. And my dad was a corporal in the military. My mom worked part-time as a bank teller in a credit union, and proposed this grandiose idea, after which, after a pregnant pause, my dad said, well, that's a really great ambition, son, but how are you going to pay for your university? And so with that kind of thought, I had to go back to the drawing board. So I had no solution. My parents didn't have the money. I could not afford it. And so a few months later, my dad came back to me. He says, listen, I have a solution for you to get a university education, but it's a little bit different from UNB. He said, my boss over at the wing, because we were living in Greenwood, Nova Scotia at the time of the Air Force Base, is a recent graduate of the Royal Military College. He's an officer, and he's also an aerospace engineering officer. So he's my boss. And he would like to, meet with you and explain to you about military college. And I'm going, military, does that mean I have to join the military? And he goes, well, yeah, just for a short while. But he said, here's the good part. The education's free. And I'm like, okay, let's think about this. So one thing led to another. And eventually I resigned myself that the only way I would get a university degree was to go through the military college. Of course, I had to get accepted, which eventually I was accepted. I was fortunate in that I was an honor student. The Chief Scout Award with Scouts was obviously well seen, and I was also an athlete. I was the provincial champion in the 1500 in high school. So those three things combined to get me accepted on the A list. And after having chosen to be pilot and got accepted for pilot, the die was cast. So in June of 1981, I sworn in back in Halifax to join the military as an officer cadet. And that's kind of how the career began, very trepidatiously.
Right. Well, I mean, that makes for a great story because everything that follows is incredible. I mean, you're a pilot, so you're a fighter pilot. You became the commanding officer for 443, the 3 Wing in Bagotville, Quebec. You've been the Director of Military Human Resources for National Defense Headquarters, Wing Commander for 4 Wing Cold Lake, Director of Air Requirements for National Defense Headquarters, Chief of Staff for Canada Command. Am I saying that? Is it Canadian Command or Canada Command?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
The Director of General Operations for Public Safety Canada, and the National Executive Director for Helmets to Hats Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've got your dream retirement job as the General Manager for the Victoria Flying Club, which we both know is a huge flight training facility on Vancouver Island, the largest on Vancouver Island.
Arguably the best in British Columbia.
That's what I think too. And you've also got 3 degrees, your Bachelor of Science in Physics and Computer Science, your Master's in Defense Management and Policy, and your PhD in Public Policy and Administration. Mm-hmm. So, your background is so deep. What I would really like us to talk about today, and because what I talk to a lot of people about all the time is sort of how to go into different areas. So perhaps they're not happy in their job, or their passion and purpose is gone. I coach people.
Career streams. Yeah, got it.
Yes. So Helmets to Hard Hats is really fascinating to me, and really it's an important bridge, I think, from the military into civilian life. And a lot of I usually see actually spouses of military people who are trying to figure things out as their partners are trying to figure things out. Mm-hmm. So can I ask you to please explain to me how Helmets to Hard Hats came about in Canada, and what your role was in that, and what does it do?
Very simple question that I could speak an hour about, but I'll try to simplify it. So if I hearken back to how it originated in America, it came about around 2003 when George Bush was president and America had decided to reinvade Iraq. And so the building trade unions are a union movement across all of North America that are involved in the construction industry. And at that period of time, we were seeing a reduction in the number of skilled workers that were entering into the industry. And so the unions were screaming for more skilled workers. And if they couldn't get skilled trained workers, they wanted new apprentices that they could then train to get the qualifications of a skilled worker. And so here we are, post-Vietnam in America, watching Iraq being invaded for the second time. And in this boardroom of building trade union leaders, they're looking at the problem of where are we going to get new skilled workers, or where are we going to get good recruits? And at the same time, they're terrified about what may come of the Iraq War, having lived through the Vietnam War and saw how our veterans, or the American veterans, were treated when they came home. And so the confluence of those two kind of forcing functions was one of a solution. And the solution was to proactively go and offer opportunities to returning vets that chose not to continue a career in the military. And just to give a little bit more detail there, a lot of the people, a lot of the American soldiers and whatnot that went over to Iraq were part-time reservists or National Guard people. So they didn't have a full-time civilian career, and they didn't have a full-time military career. They went over there full-time during the operation, but 6 to 9 months later, they came home to part-time or perhaps nothing. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. And so we just transposed that into the Canadian jurisdiction. And the first question was, is there a need? Do we have Canadian veterans that are having a hard time finding a new career if they so choose to go into a civilian career? And if so, would this work? And so that's where they decided to hire someone like me. And so the first question was, is there an interest? And it just kind of grew from there. And clearly there was an interest, because we had hundreds of people register into the program, hundreds that were accepted into apprenticeships, and probably most of them succeeded. I don't know, because we didn't track the outcome. We didn't have the ability to track the outcomes. Mm-hmm. We're only a small team of 5, but we certainly knew how many got accepted. And the ones that we heard back from, usually we did not hear back from the veteran, we heard back from the union, and they were just, awestruck at how disciplined, how committed, how quickly these people learn. And they're simple things like the fact that these veterans would actually read the instructions, right. That they were safety conscious, that they were team workers, that they would help their fellow team worker that was having a hard day. They were just blown away. And so it became a huge success.
And what do you think were your greatest obstacles in sort of hitting the ground in Canada?
Well, the first one was just bringing awareness to the program. And so the way that we were able to do that, the way that I was able to do that, is that because I was just recently out of the military, I was still very well connected. So I met with the number 2, the Vice Chief of Defense Staff, and asked him, first of all, if the senior military cadre would have any opposition to me literally recruiting people that were looking to leave the military into this program. And what he told me was, he said, Greg, no, he said, the timing actually is perfect, because we have a lot of veterans coming back from Afghanistan that unfortunately, for a number of reasons, health or PTSD or otherwise, will not continue into the military. And so we're working to find ways to help them get into a civilian career, overcome PTSD, overcome any physical disadvantages that they have. And so with that opened the door for me to actually be welcome onto all the bases across Canada. And what happens is twice a year, we have what we call a SISIP session. So it's a guidance counselor-led session for anyone currently in the military looking to leave, so that they could understand what the pension benefits were if they were entitled to it, what kind of health care was available, and then more importantly, if they were looking to go into a new career, what was available and how could they achieve it. And so I was welcome to attend these briefings twice a year at every base across Canada. So I took advantage of that. And that's kind of how I got the word out there, one briefing at a time. And obviously, having been a retired general, I had a little bit of credibility in the room when I walked in. And quite often it was successful. We would have a number of people register with the program after, call us up, and then we get them into the system.
So I know you did your PhD on, a specific period of time in British Columbia, and with respect to apprenticeship programs and how that whole structure, or not plan, but how that all came to be. Can you talk to me about the current climate, about apprenticeships in British Columbia or Canada, federally and provincially, and what's the current state of affairs? Because you hear different things. Oh, you can't get an apprenticeship program. But I've also been to seminars where they just can't find enough people for the trades. So and there's a huge labor shortage.
Yeah, there sure is. It's a bit of a complicated question, and I'll caveat it by saying that my knowledge is about 2 years old because I have not been involved since I finished the PhD, nor in the time that I was helmet to hard hats. It's complicated in the sense that because of Confederation and the fact that through the process of Confederation, education was delegated to the provinces and territories, each province and territory literally does its own thing, okay? So each province and territory has their own jurisdictional approach. They have their overarching methodology. So here in BC, they have the Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training that oversees postgraduate, post-secondary, including apprenticeships. And in each province, it's a similar kind of thing. Now, with regard to apprenticeships, what I found in BC to start with was that apprenticeships were kind of absorbed within post-secondary vocational education and training. And so the outcome of my thesis is that apprenticeships as a form of vocational education and training was an isolated skills ecosystem. What does that all mean? That's academic speak. Essentially, it had become homogenized within the behemoth of public college delivery of vocational education and training. So a lot of students will go to BCIT to become an electrician. And as a result, BCIT becomes the dominant force in shaping their training and their apprenticeship, which all sounds really good. The downfall of that is that to become a qualified electrician, you also have to have, in addition to your vocational education, the training in a workplace. In other words, you have to be sponsored by someone that will hire you at a suppressed wage because you're not fully qualified and allow you to build up hours, literally thousands of hours, before you can actually write the final exam to get your license. And so the pitfall that I found in BC, as well as all across Canada, was two things. The first thing was apprenticeships weren't fully understood by the college system. And secondly, there were not a lot of employers that were willing to take the risk on a brand new apprentice. They might hire someone that was 2 or 3 years into a 5-year program, but they didn't want to take someone new because they were a liability. And so it's kind of a conundrum. We have a shortage of skilled workers, but the people that are hiring them don't want to take the risk of literally training someone that's unproven. They want the final product that's all licensed that they can send solo, if you will, out into the work site and maybe supervise others. That's a conundrum, and that can only be overcome with education and leadership at the federal and provincial level.
And I think you've sort of already answered my next question, but to sort of simplify it, what do you think can be done on the ground? Say, what, you know, is it just employers being more open to taking on apprentices, recognizing that they've got coal and they're just turning this person into a diamond? Or
again, there's no easy answer. There's no silver bullet, but there's a multiplicity of ways that I would see to solve it and to improve upon it. And one of them is the building trade unions, or any union for that matter. Now, unions often are seen through a polarized lens by Canadians, either that's good or bad. But on the good side of unions, they fully are subscribed to training, development of skilled workers, bringing them up to the point where they're fully skilled and can go into the workplace. So the reason why my program, Helmets to Hard Hats, was affiliated with the building trade unions is that the unions not only understood apprenticeships as a form of vocational education and training, but they fully subscribed to giving people an opportunity to develop themselves to become fully licensed. And so as a result, they were kind of the portal for my veterans to get into the apprenticeship and eventually get their license. So the unions, if the unions were allowed to continue to do what they normally do, that would be one part of the solution. Depending on the governments in power, they either support or suppress the union movement. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that 80% plus of the employers in Canada are small. They're less than 10 or 12 staff. And as a result, if you only have 10 or 12 employees and you bring on one apprentice that's unskilled, that's 1 in 10. And when you realize that that apprentice has to be supervised, especially during the first couple of years, you're actually detracting from the productivity of one of those 10 skilled workers. And so most of these small employers will say that yes, they embrace the idea of supporting these young folks, but they can't afford to do it. They can't afford to take the risk. They don't want to take on the training burden. So they just say, no, we're not going to do it. Bigger companies can afford to absorb them. So the multinationals like TransCanada Pipelines, LNG, Canada up in Kitimat, they can afford to do that, and they do so, but they're also subsidized by the government in so doing. A third model is that government at the federal or provincial level subsidizes these small businesses so as to incentivize them to hire an apprentice. So in a way, they're going to cover part of the training cost while the employer takes the risk of the apprentice making a mistake in the workplace and, scrapping a piece of metal or whatever. So that would help, I think, incentivize small employers and minimize the risk. The fourth model that they use in Australia with great success is they create kind of like a consortium of employers. So let's just say that there's 5 or 6 service stations, garages around the lower mainland. None of them can afford to take on apprentices because they only have 5 or 6 mechanics. But if you lump them all together, they have 25 mechanics. And so what they can do is the group of them can endeavor to hire 1 or 2 apprentices. And that way they're sharing the risk amongst the 5 of them. And even better, that apprentice will go from service station to service station, building their experience with different supervisors and maybe looking at different aspects of the trade. One year they may be just doing tire changes. The next year they may be working on the engine. The third year they might be doing body work. The fourth year they might be painting. And so with that model, I think that's another way forward that has been proven in Australia, by the way.
Right, that's brilliant.
I think so.
I do, from your experience with people who are entering apprenticeship programs, and even I know you are working with a number of apprentices now, what is the feedback from people who are actually going through the program? I don't mean academically, I mean the bureaucratic piece of it, or just getting into a program or working their way through it. Have you received any feedback, positive or negative?
Well, I mean, with the 2 apprentices that we have at the Victoria Flying Club, I mean, they're all over. They love it. And the one young fellow that we brought into an apprenticeship, a first-year apprentice, he was blown away at the opportunities for him to develop a career as an AME, as an aerospace mechanical engineer. But all that to be said is there is a lot of literature out there, a lot of surveys that have been done by the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum with regard to the experiences of apprenticeships. And it's a whole mixed bag of response. And by the way, there's a very high, not so much failure rate, but incompletion rate. A lot of apprentices never complete for a number of reasons. But, some of the dominant factors in the equation is the experience that they have with their employer. So if they have an employer that they feel secure with, that's going to keep them on for more than just a few months, maybe keep them on for 2 or 3 years, or even the full 4 to 5 years, depending on the trade, that's a huge plus because job security is massive. Now you have to understand that an apprentice is obligated every so often to return back and do their academic educational piece that could be anywhere from 6 to 16 weeks. And so for an employer that's in the busy season, having to let go of their apprentice because they got to go back to school, they might go, screw it. I'm just going to fire this kid and hire someone else because I need people right now. And that's part of the equation. So if you have an employer that understands the apprenticeship requirements and supports this person through their journey of the workplace plus going back to school, several cycles, that's a huge, huge factor. That in addition to the job security. There are a lot of kids, though, that don't go through an apprenticeship in that form. They will just simply go to post-secondary college. They will get what they call a pre-apprenticeship diploma. And with that, they think that everyone's going to want to hire them. Unfortunately, that's far from the truth. So that's why the apprenticeship really is a unique kind of facet within the vocational education training system. And without that employer that's going to sponsor that person with their apprenticeship, it's not going to go anywhere.
Do you think now, because we've had a shift in our economic climate, and we do have a real labor shortage now in BC for sure. I mean, I can't speak to what's happening in the rest of Canada, or the world. But what I see, certainly in the aviation industry or transportation industry, for very skilled trades, we have a massive labor shortage. So do you think that that's going to change an employer's perspective? Like, we got to keep these guys because we're going to have nobody pretty soon if we don't?
Well, you would think so, but we've gone through economic cycles before. Think back to 1986 or in 2008.
Right.
And so we've seen this before, and we have the data that disproves that theory of benevolence. Everyone wants someone else to hire that apprentice, and then they'll poach them when they're skilled. That typically is what happens. It's unfortunate, but true. I mean, this is just capitalism at its worst.
Right.
So, despite the blip in the workforce situation because of COVID-19, the macroeconomics demonstrate that we have not only a massive shortage of skilled workers, but particularly in the trades. And this is another aspect of my PhD thesis, was that in Canada, we have what we call an education logic as opposed to an employment logic. And this goes right back to our colonial days with the United Kingdom, where we thought that a post-secondary degree in arts would link you to a CEO job because that's what the nobility had. The truth of the matter is that today we still put an overarching emphasis on academics and not on vocational. The dumb kids go to vocational typically is a way of looking at it, which is far from the truth. We have highly intelligent people in vocational. But the truth of it is that the stigma for most Canadians, and the parents in particular, is they want their kid to be a doctor or a lawyer. They don't want them to be a pipe fitter. I mean, that's a blue collar stigmatized, thing for dumb kids. So that's part of the resistive forces that are out there. But I used to like to say, when I was on the stump going around to all these meetings and whatnot with the building trade unions, is that I still believe that now it's probably only 10 years, that a qualified licensed gas fitter or electrician can draw a better salary than a general practitioner. And I still believe that, because we're going to have such a huge shortage of skilled trades worker in Canada. And just think about it, second largest nation on earth, a low number of people living here, and we have a huge dependence on infrastructure, whether it's ports or airports or rail or what have you. Who's going to build it? Who's going to fix it? So the supply and demand is going to kick in, and those people that have those trade qualifications, they can call the shots. They can call whatever salary they want. So, and just look at what's going on in BC right now with the building boom and the price of supplies. Well, it's not just the price of a 2x4. It's going to be how much you're going to pay per hour for that carpenter.
Right.
Because that's going up too.
I'm of the same mind. Skilled trades, it's, if I could turn back time, right? I mean, I remember when I was younger, there were lawyers that I worked with who were retiring, and they used to laugh and say, I'm going to drive a dump truck. But many years later, they said that was the best turn of events they ever had.
Wow.
Because, well, number one, I think the people are more sort of truly honest, but also the demand, the difference in the kinds of stress that you carry, right? And using your hands, using your brain in a different kind of way. I wish that I was far more technically inclined, and that, I like to play with rebuilding airplanes and cars and stuff like that. But I wish my mind really worked that way. Mm-hmm. I really admire that kind of talent and ability.
It is, and it's a craft. I mean, you just look at Murray Palmer at the Victoria Flying Club and what he's able to do in rebuilding an airplane. That's more than a skill. That's a craft. That's artisanal, right? Mm-hmm. So it's combining knowledge with skill and experience into a craft. And there's, that you have to admire people that are able to raise to that level of ability. It's quite remarkable. And it's going to be in hugely high demand.
Yeah, I think so too. I do have a couple of sort of closing questions for you. The first is there anything that is important to this conversation to you that I've missed or haven't asked you?
Well, like you said, there's a whole spectrum of stuff we could discuss, so I'd say no.
Okay, good. And you personally, so as I was going through all of the information, and I read a lot of your papers sort of if you post them or, if I've seen them. I have to ask, I know you talked about getting an education at the beginning as your driver, but what drives you now?
Curiosity. I don't know. I've always been a bit of a closet academic. That's why I was a part-time student most of my adult life. Like, who in their right mind would start a PhD at the age of 44?
Right.
Right? And who would stick with it for 10 years and finish it?
Right.
But I just have this insatiable curiosity about the world. And that's part of the reason why I left the military when I was still only 44 years old, 29 years into a career. Most people were gobsmacked because they expected me to go on to become the commander of the Air Force. And I just said, I made a promise to my daughter, she graduated from the high school that she started in. And if I stay in the military, I'll get promoted and I'll be moved and I'll break that promise. So it was the right time to go, and I don't regret it, because the experience I've had since then has been so interesting and so, I don't know. It's also the ability to give back. I think that's part of it. I'm at that part in my life now where I've accumulated all this experience and knowledge, but there's the giving back and making humanity a little bit better, contributing to one person at a time, like our apprentice, 2 of them at the club, and so on and so forth. So I didn't really answer your question, but
No,
I guess
you did.
Okay.
Yeah, you did. Sometimes I'm just so curious about well, not sometimes, all the time. I'm just so curious about what is the motivator, especially for people who you can see, your mom might think you just jumped around a bit from job to job, but you can see there's a drive there. There's the next thing. There's a need to be challenged. So I just like to know, what's the next challenge? What's the purpose?
Maybe it's that whole military normalization, because being in the military is it's focused on service to your fellow citizen, to your country, to ideals and values and interests, where you're literally willing to put your life on the line, which I did for that reason. And so I think that when you leave the military, those kind of values and drivers don't leave you. You continue to be professional in whatever it is that you do, whether it's a little bit of landscaping or flying a plane or whatever. And so I think that's part of it as well. And so, what more can I say?
Right. Well, I really appreciate your time today. And I really appreciate that you continue to serve. And I don't know what else to say, but thank you.
You're welcome.